Dear friends, how are you today? How's the day been? How are you doing as the days begin to mount up? I'm Mark Golub. It's always wonderful to share this time with you. And I want you to know I am so appreciative of the emails you send me. They are thoughtful, and they are often very sweet and lovely to me. So I'm very gratified that this series, Gam Yachad, together during COVID-19, has been of some help to you. And I'll say this over and over again. No matter how frightening this time is, and it is frightening to see the numbers of infected grow every day, and to know that more people are dying. And so much of the news is sensationalism that often draws large and sweeping conclusions and predictions that are simply not supported by actual data. But it's frightening. Even if we're all taking the appropriate precautions, staying at home, away from others we're not living with, keeping our hands clean, and out of our mouth, nose, and eyes, it's still frightening. And it's more frightening for those living alone and who may be the oldest demographic. So I always remind you, JBS is here for you. I am here for you. And we're going to get through this together. This time I simply want to share a Jewish concern I have. And I may be speaking only for myself. If you disagree with me, fine. But something is concerning me that I really want to address. You know, we're coming up on Passover. This will be a Passover unlike any other. The four questions ask, how is this night different from all other nights? We understand, for the vast majority of us, this Seder night will be different from all prior Seder nights. I often wonder if survivors of the Shoah might see this question differently. But for this vast majority of us who've spent years and years of Seder nights in the company of family, the physical separation we have been forced into makes a family Seder physically impossible. And it's amazing, in the best sense of the word, to see how people are coming up with online and video ways they'll be able to connect with their family members on Passover. And Zoom has become a common word in all of our vocabularies. And I'm very happy to remind you that JBS will be televising a Seder led by Rabbi Mark S of the Orthodox Hampton Synagogue. That'll be at 5 p.m. on Wednesday night, first Seder night. And we'll be repeating it at 8 p.m. and 11 p.m. for different time zones. Also 5 p.m. on Thursday night, second Seder night. So all of these efforts are marvelous and a way of our living with these very difficult times. But there's also been developing a theme in Jewish circles, which is not marvelous. And that's the suggestion that the coronavirus should be included in our Seder service as the 11th plague. That as the book of Exodus recounts the 10 plagues in Egypt, we now are experiencing a plague of our own, and it should be associated with and spoken in the context of the 10 plagues of the Passover story. That it becomes, the coronavirus becomes the 11th plague of this Passover. I believe this is a terrible mistake. I understand that the motivation for this may come from very good motives. We're experiencing a plague today, and people are suffering and dying. And one of the fundamental aspects of the Seder is for it to make us sensitive to the pain of others. But the coronavirus is nothing like the 10 plagues in Egypt. Nothing in kind, nothing in essence, nothing in purpose, nothing in meaning. And to associate the coronavirus with the 10 plagues, in the notion that we are to be more sensitive at our Seders, or that we're going to make our Seders more relevant to our times, as if the Seder needs to be made more relevant, or that the coronavirus adds to our understanding of the whole point of Pesach, that is, and I say this gently but affirmedly, that is a form of contemporary idolatry. And because this may not be clear to everyone, I want to explain the profound differences between the 10 plagues and the coronavirus, and why any connection between them is inappropriate at best, hideous at worst. First, the 10 plagues were the willful and purposeful act of God. That's the Torah story. And that purpose had a moral and ethical underpinning. And we all understand this. The Egyptian god, Pharaoh, and Pharaoh was not simply the ruler of Egypt. The Pharaoh was God incarnate for the Egyptians. Pharaoh, the god of Egypt, had enslaved another people, the children of Israel. According to the Midrash, Jewish commentary, that enslavement had gone on for 400 years. The god of Egypt, the Pharaoh, had ordered that every male child born to an Israelite family, every male child, this had nothing to do with whether the child was the firstborn male or not, every Israelite baby boy was drowned in the Nile River. According to the Midrash, every single day, 200 Israelite male infants were drowned in the Nile River. It was a holocaust of its own. And the Israelite slaves were beaten and brutalized and murdered by Egyptians carrying out the will of the god of Egypt. The 10 plagues were not simply a natural disaster. The 10 plagues had a purpose, a moral purpose, to force the god of Egypt to, in the words of the Torah, Shalach et ami, let my people go. The moral purpose was to put an end to the enslavement of the children of Israel. The 10 plagues are at the heart of the universal message of Passover. It's the reason why Rabbi Irving Yitz Greenberg calls Passover the most important event in human history. The most important event in human history, for Passover's transcending universal moral message is no one has the right to enslave another human being. And that refers to slavery of every kind. Physical slavery, but also emotional slavery, sexual slavery, financial slavery, slavery which strips the other of free will and destroys self-dignity and self-worth. We are told again and again in the Torah, because you were slaves in Egypt, you will not enslave or abuse or disrespect any other, but you will treat the stranger, the other, the same as the homeborn. You will treat the non-Jew the same way as you would the Jew. Passover is more than the holiday that celebrates the birth of the Jewish people. And that's what Pesach really is. It's the story and celebration of the children of Israel's becoming the Jewish people, galvanized around the Torah that they would receive willingly at Sinai, and then pass willingly, consciously, purposefully down generation after generation after generation, l'dor vador, to this very day. We learn we don't celebrate the Passover story, we relive our story. Each of us is to feel that we were slaves in Egypt, that each of us had to make the conscious decision to put blood on our doorposts the night of the 10th plague, and that we had to choose to leave Egypt with the emerging Jewish people. This is the context of the 10 plagues. They were consciously and purposely done by God for a moral reason. None of this applies to the coronavirus. God has not inflicted this plague on us, on humanity. There is no moral end which this plague is seeking to evoke. The coronavirus is the product of human error, or accident, or negligence, or irresponsibility. It is not the act of God trying to achieve a moral end. But the 10 plagues were only experienced by the Egyptians. The children of Israel were unaffected by any of the first 9 plagues. No surrounding peoples of other nations were affected by the 10 plagues. It was not a pandemic. And even the 10th plague only affected those who did not put the blood of the lamb on their doorposts. And according to Midrash, not every Israelite family did so. And some Egyptian households did. And the cry that went out through the land of Egypt that night shook the heavens. And the God of Egypt, Pharaoh, finally did respond to the universal moral command, let my people go. That's the point of the 10 plagues. They were a moral act of war against a God and a people who were enslaving others, and those others happened to be our people. There's nothing similar about the coronavirus. The coronavirus has no moral purpose. I hope everyone understands that. There's no moral purpose to this virus. There's no purpose at all to this virus. It's a hideous, tragic phenomenon of nature unleashed by human beings in China. The coronavirus is not the act of God. I hope I don't have to convince you of that. I hope no one who's watching JBS right now says, oh yes, it is. Oh, I thought it was. No. The coronavirus is not the act of God. And to associate this virus with the 10 plagues is to miss the entire point. and message and meaning of Pesach. Yes, the Egyptian people suffered as a result of the 10 plagues, as many throughout the world are suffering today. And Passover is also meant to heighten our sensitivity to the suffering of others. But the suffering of the Egyptian people were for a reason, not capricious. The Egyptian people had implemented slavery and brutality and murder. And at any time, the god of Egypt, Pharaoh, could have stopped the human suffering. All Pharaoh had to do was, let my people go. And it's not just about my people, the Israelites. The Torah is teaching a larger message, a universal message. All people must be free. All people must be let go. And it's so revealing about the Jewish tradition to see the empathy our sage rabbis had for the suffering of others, even the suffering of our enemies. One midrash has Moses going from Egyptian home to Egyptian home, trying to convince the Egyptians to put blood on the door. They should be spared of the 10th plague. And Moses is heartsick over their suffering, heartsick over the Egyptian suffering the night of the 10th plague. That's the empathy of the Jewish tradition. And at the Red Sea, when Egyptian males suffered the very fate they had been inflicting for years upon Israelite males, drowning in the Red Sea. It's a form of biblical literary justice, poetic, moral justice. Even then, in the Midrash, God calls the Egyptians my children. In a classic midrash, after Moses and Miriam are leading a song of triumphant jubilation at the destruction of the Egyptian enemy when they are safe on the other side of the Red Sea, God tells them to knock it off. That even though the Egyptians were a hateful enemy, bent on annihilating, murdering every Israeli child, woman, and man, they were still human beings. They were still God's children. What a fabulous moral lesson. The human genius of the Midrash and the Jewish tradition. Yes, we are told to defend ourselves against any rodef. A rodef is a pursuer seeking to kill us, to kill you, to kill anyone. We all have an obligation to do everything and anything necessary to protect our lives and the lives of our families and our community, even if it means taking the life of the rodef, of one's enemy. But we're never to rejoice in taking the life of an enemy. And we're never to forget that the enemy, even one's enemy, has a humanity of his own that can never be forgotten or trivialized or forgotten or demeaned. We don't celebrate and enjoy the death of our enemy. Tragically, the 10 plagues and the Red Sea were necessary. the God of Israel, was at war with the God of Egypt. And the God of Israel taught the world, no human being has the right to enslave another. According to the Jewish tradition, that is the essence of the first of the Ten Commandments. Ten Commandments. First of the Ten Commandments. Most of you know it by heart. I am Adonai your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Out of the house of bondage, out of slavery. From this commandment, our sage rabbis teach us, no one may be a slave, no one may enslave another. That is the therefore, the doing, the act implicit in the first commandment. We may not be slaves, we may not enslave others. None of this has anything at all to do with the horrific plague of the coronavirus that is keeping us in separate homes on Seder night and is literally threatening our lives and the lives of God's children throughout the world. And this is not God's doing. Nor will God make a supernatural miracle to end this plague. People will have to end this plague. We must find the way to conquer this plague. And that's also the true and profound message of the holiday of Passover, that human beings make miracles for their fellow man and woman in response to their sense of the God of this universe. The quintessential personality in Rabbinic Midrash is a man named Nachshon, the son of Amminadab. Nachshon ben Amminadab. According to the Midrash, when the children were facing annihilation at the hands of the Egyptian army at the Red Sea, Moses cried out to God for help, for salvation, for a miracle. And in the Torah, the text itself, God answers with what to me is the single most important verse in the entire book of Exodus. Ma titzak elai, dabru al bnei Yisrael vayisa'u. God answers Moses in the Torah by saying, why do you cry unto me? Why do you cry unto me? Tell the children of Israel to go forward. To go forward. And based on that verse, the sage rabbis created the Midrash of Nachshon ben Amminadab, a prince of the tribe of Judah, who did not wait for a miracle, but he himself plunged into the sea. And in the Midrash, only when Nachshon had the courage and the faith in whatever God he understood to be permeating the entire universe and infusing the human soul and spirit with this courage to go forward, only then, the rabbis tell us, did the Red Sea split and the children of Israel followed and ultimately were saved from annihilation. In the Jewish tradition, there's the imagery of a partnership between man and God. In response to God, human beings have the courage to go forward and to split the Red Seas of life. God did not bring the coronavirus plague. It has nothing to do with the plagues we read about and understand and that we read in the Haggadah every year. The 10 plagues have a power and a sanctity of their own, a message of their own. They brought pain and suffering to an enemy of humanity. And we recognize that suffering. It's why there's this tradition at the Seder. One dips one's little pinky into the cup of wine. The cup of wine represents joy. And we take a drop from our cup of joy and we drop it on our plate. We are diminishing our own joy because of the pain and suffering of the children of the Egyptian people. But the 10 plagues were the agent of our people's freedom, which taught a lesson that all mankind has learned from. The coronavirus is just an ugly, horrible, horrific virus, an ugly plague. But it is a terrible mistake for any Jew to associate it with the 10 plagues of the Passover story. Passover is a time when we are to be empathetic to human suffering of all kinds. And the suffering experienced with this coronavirus is staggering. And in one way or another, it touches all of us. It is wholly appropriate to acknowledge the human suffering caused by this coronavirus, which has no moral purpose whatsoever. But to add it to the Passover story is to grossly distort and demean the power of our Seder celebration. It is my fervent hope that none of you make this terrible mistake. That's all the time we have. Until the next time. Thank you for joining me. Remember to write me at JBS Community at jbstv.org. Also email me if you wish at Rabbi Golub at jbstv.org. Having said that, I say it again. My wish is that all of you stay safe and be well. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.